make sure you grab some of these for your family and your kids and grandkids. There won't be any more of these. When that box is empty, they're done. Okay? And Pepper's back there in the pink shirt. She's the one that's gonna give these to you. Okay, if you'd like to purchase those. Okay? And are we ready to go? Let's go.
We're ready to go. You will get them on the stage. The microphone is on the stage.
It's right here. Can I do this?
No, that works too. Mike,
check.
There's that little one right there, so that works perfect. So use the mics. That's great.
I'm still the best looking guy in the family, Chuck. Okay, if I use this, that'll get there too. Welcome to the Hughes reunion. Isn't it wonderful for all of you to be here and for me to be able to see how gorgeous you guys are? I keep teasing my kids, all of my daughters. I want them to get this nose right here. This is my Santa Cruz nose, my Mayan nose. And I kept telling my kids that my daughters, I wanted them all to get my nose. And my wife would go, "No, don't do that to them. Ooh, how ugly." But I want you to know that I'm very prominent. Not down here, but I'm very prominent. I have a very prominent feature. All I did was I just put together I'm just going to tell you some stories. I've got an hour, a little over about an hour and 10 minutes. I just put together some slides to tell you some stories about family. Is that okay? We're just going to tell you about Sam and Adonijah and just have a good time for a few minutes. So you want to remember that I'm an old Mormon bishop, so some of this is a little bit Mormonized, okay? So you have to put up with me on that. We want to talk about Sam and Adonijah. This is the two earliest pictures I have of Sam and Adonijah. There's Sam, okay? Shortly after he got to Tucson, that's about what he looked like, and that's what Adonijah looked like a few years after she got married. Kind of good looking, huh? Like some of us? If you're good looking, smile. Oh, Meg. All right, I believe you. Pastor over there smiling too. Okay, Chuck? He's got the PowerPoint button back there. Okay, you already saw the one down here, and we want to just first of all talk a little bit about Modesto Eladio, Santa Cruz. Our first Santa Cruzes came over. There was one Santa Cruz that came over in 1620. And we have tried to tie him into Modesto Eladio. Modesto Eladio Santa Cruz was born in 1752. Some of our lines, like the Perea and the Moreno and the Elias, we've traced them all the way back to Spain. Now some of those ties are a little bit shaky because there's not a whole lot of records. But we've done the best we can to get some of our families back to Spain. And one of the things I wanted to show you here was, remember that before Adonijah there was no Mexico. It was all New Spain. And a lot of family members say, well, tell me all about our Mexican heritage. And Mexico to us nowadays means someone that lives in Mexico or comes from Mexico. But to Adonijah, she was very proud to be a Mexican, because a Mexican was someone that had Native American blood and Spanish blood. That was the definition. And so she was very proud that she came from Modesto Eladio Santa Cruz and Mariana Gonzalez de Zayas and eventually Petra Alcantar, who was our Pima Indian. We probably had 3 or 4 Pima Indian mothers that provided us with our Native American blood. And we probably had 3 or 4 Native American fathers that provided us with our Spanish blood. So we actually have several lines that gave us our bloodline. And this is what Spaniards look like. There probably weren't too many of those here in New Spain at the time, but we like to think that if Modesto Eladio had been able to dress the way he wanted to, that might have been what Modesto, and he would be like your 4th or 5th great-grandfather, most of us in this room. Your great-great-great-great-grandfather. Okay? Check. Okay, where's my drum roll? Uh-oh. Because if the drum roll doesn't work, then I have some video clips on here, on the Maya, we're going to show you. Well, we can tell a couple of stories while he gets that fixed. Remember that Adonijah said to family frequently, and 3 times to newspaper reporters, that her grandfather had, quote, painted the faces at Santa Vera. Well, now we know that in about 1797, the Catholic Church sent up artisans, a group of artisans, to do the paintings and to do the sculpturing at Santa Vera. But at that time, Juan Santa Cruz would have been about 17 years old and of Spanish lineage, very close Spanish lineage. And it was very likely then that he helped paint, as Adonasha said, some of the faces on the paintings at Santa Vera. So when you go to Santa Vera and you see some of those beautiful paintings, we don't of course know which ones or how much he painted, but we know that he was involved in that painting. So Adonasha, when she went out there at her 50th wedding anniversary, said that she thought some of them looked a little bit old and a little bit worn. And she lamented that because when her grandfather painted them, they were very bright colors and very pretty colors. Since then, they've kind of renovated them and restored some of them. So Santa Vera is the place where Sam and Adonasha were married and where many of our ancestors were married. Okay, so, and that's Father Kieran McCarthy down at the bottom. He helped us a great deal on our Bohorquez line. He was the curator of Santa Vera, and he also had an office at the University of Arizona Library as a historian. And he was kind of like an earlier Homer Thiel. He was the expert in the local area for the Catholic records. And he helped us a great deal on our Bohorquez line, Chuck and I, as we would visit him at Santa Vera in his office. Okay, Chuck? Okay, it worked! Okay, we want to talk a little, those are supposed to be wedding bells, about Sam and Hiram trying to woo Petra and Adonasha to get him to marry them. And so there's Adonasha and there's Petra, and as Homer said, Guadalupe is the lady that raised them because they lost their father to the cholera and then they lost their mother a few years later. Okay? And one of the couple of stories real quick here I just want to tell you is Hiram Stevens fell in love with Petra. He had come through Tucson earlier, about 6 or 8 years earlier when he was in the military. And then he came back to Tucson and he had met Petra his first time through. And he wanted to marry Petra. They were very much in love. And they went to ask Guadalupe, the aunt, if Petra could marry Hiram. And Guadalupe said no for 2 reasons. One is he's a gringo, and number 2, he's not Catholic. And so Hiram said, well, I'm sorry, Aunt Guadalupe, although they never called her aunt. On the census records, they call her the mother. Petra and Adonasha, on the census records, called Guadalupe their mother on a couple of them because she was the one that raised them. But anyway, Guadalupe said, no, you can't for those 2 reasons. And Hiram said, well, I can't change the color of my skin, but I will join the Catholic Church. And she said, let's see. And so he went out and took the Catholic lessons and joined the Catholic Church. And so Petra and Hiram were married and everything was fine. And then comes Sam. Sam comes in about 1858. And Sam and Hiram become very close business partners. And Sam had also been here earlier. And he first saw Petra when she was about 8 years old. And then when he came back, he went back to California when he Adonasha, right. And when he came back a few years later, she was 11, almost 12. And Sam fell in love with Adonasha and said, I'd like to have your hand in marriage. And Hiram said, wait, do you have white skin, and are you gringo, and do you belong to the Church of England? And he said, yes. And Hiram said, oops. And so Sam fell in love with Adonasha, and by this time I guess Guadalupe had softened up. And she supported the marriage of Adonasha and Sam, and they were married at Santa Vera also. And Sam did not join the Catholic Church at that time. So Sam and Adonasha were very much in love. As a family, I get a lot of questions about why she would get married when she wasn't quite 12 years old. Well, I think that Marge and Dick and some of you folks in here have more records than I do. But see, Sam's father also had tuberculosis. And he was in a sanitarium, and that's Sam Sr. And so when Sam Hughes was 11 years old, he and his brother Will were out on the streets. They had 3 or 4 of their siblings that were in a home for indigent children. And so Sam and his little brother William, they either had to make it or break it. And so when he was 11, he was an adult. So when he came and fell in love with Adonasha, he said, "You're 11 years old, let's get married." And she said, "Well, how about my toys?" No. And I guess at that time, 11 was a little bit young, but maybe it wasn't too young. And so they went ahead and got married, and that's why they had the first couple of miscarriages, because she was a little bit too young to be having kids yet. But remember, Sam wanted to have kids because he had TB, and he didn't know how long he was going to live. And so they decided to have as many kids as they could. Ended up having 15 kids, 7 of which lived to maturity. All of you in here that want to have 15 kids, smile. You're lying to me. Oh, all right. I saw it. Okay? So that's Guadalupe and Petra and Atanasha. Okay, check? All right. One of the classical pieces of literature that we have in our family is where Sam went to a dance when he came here with tuberculosis to Tucson in 1858. He just barely made it into town, and they had a big ballet or a big dance. And that's on your disc, and it's also in this book right here. And this book, of course, is in here. And I give it word for word. He said he went to see the town of Tucson. Took about 20 minutes. He walked around the town of Tucson. Okay, saw all the businesses that were there. And he talks about the dance and how everybody just sat on cowhides or on sheepskin, and how they had these big kettle drums, bum, 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 and that's how they kept the beat, and a couple of people with fiddles. And they were just out there. They probably weren't doing rock and roll yet, because Elvis wasn't born yet, but whatever they were doing, they were having a good time. Okay? And so Tom talks about that dance, and I hope that you'll take another look at that. That's a real piece of Hughes history. And guess who was at that dance? Adonasha was. She was born in 1850, so she was 8 years old. And he said everybody there at that dance was Mexican. And he loved that. He loved that copper tone skin. And on his children, he loved especially Jesse. Jesse had a nice copper tone skin. Emma was a little bit pale faced. But Sam loved having Native American blood in his lineage. So that's a real classic. You want to read that. I think the funniest part about that is this elderly Mexican lady came in and she was dragging this big pig. It was going oink, oink, and she was dragging him along, oink, oink. And so one of the guys said, "Why don't you," and had a whole bunch of dogs and cats. And the guy said, "Well, why don't you just let the dogs and cats go and let the pig kind of roam around over here in the corner?" And she says, "Oh no." She says, "We got gringos here, and gringos like pork." So she wasn't going to let that pig go. So that's a neat dance. And I think the other thing that he liked was during the daytime, he said there was about 250 women that came to get water. Remember, they had to get water out of the Santa Cruz River. And even today, the well that Sam dug on the homestead up here on Main Street, you've all been to Main Street, when they drew the water out of the ground, they couldn't drink it. It was just too alkaline. So even for many years, they would only use the well water to water their plants and their cattle and their sheep. They still had to go down to the river to get water. And he said that he saw some women that had up to 5-gallon, what they called ollas or whatever on their head, and that they would take a little rebozo, a little piece of cloth, and they would wind it around to where it would kind of form a little cup, and then they'd put this big olla on their heads and walk home with 5 gallons of water, and then they would always leave just enough of that rebozo to where it would just come over their face where you could only see 1 or 2 eyes. And Sam said the thing that he wanted to do most was he wanted to go and see what all those women looked like without their rebozos over their face. I never had even realized that there was that tradition. And so read that. It's a great little story. Okay, again. I think we got the volume up real good on that one, didn't we? Sorry about that.
Flash flood.
Okay. No more sleeping in my talk, huh? Okay. I just want to take a couple of minutes. Again, this is on your CD. Petra and Adonasha were raised in kind of a poor home. Guadalupe was land rich and money poor. She had inherited a lot of land from Modesto Eladio Santa Cruz down. On the 1780 census or 1790 census, the census writer said that Modesto Eladio Santa Cruz was the outstanding citizen of Tucson. And so he did own some property, and I have some of those records. And our family claimed, when it went from Mexican to the United States, our family claimed from Spanish land grants to have almost 200,000 acres of land. Our various families, and I give you those maps in there, our extended family. Well, the United States, of course, didn't believe us because we were Hughes and Santa Cruzes, so they wanted to go back to Mexico City and check the original land grants. And the actual amount of land that we were actually able to maintain, our family, was not 200,000, 193,000 acres. It was only 23,000 acres. So Adonasha was ticked most of her life over the United States government. On April the 15th, if any of you smile or don't smile, that might have been Adonasha about that time, because she thought her family had a lot of land. And the original land grants just weren't that big. They just weren't that big. But the good part was they had water. This is the Santa Cruz River as it goes between Tubac and Tucson. Actually, between Guavavi and Tubac, and then by the time it gets to Tucson, it's only as big down as it is down there on your left. So there was a lot of use of water from Tubac and Tucson. And that's what a Spanish land grant looks like, right there. And the Morenos were ours. That was one of our families, so that's one of our family land grants. And so even though we only got to keep 20,000 acres, most of that land was the best land. It was right along the riverbanks, where it could be used for agriculture. Okay, Haas? Okay, I just want to take a second. On the disc and on the thing that I sent all of you, there was a map where you could go downtown Tucson, and on these two maps here, you could go to downtown Tucson, and you could actually see that this is Alameda Street coming in, and you could actually see the little pink building that now is the San Agustin Church. And so, what I wanted to show you back here is this is Campo Santo, where they buried many of our ancestors. And I give you a list of the ancestors that are buried there. We have to remember that before Tucson, there was Tubac and there was Guavavi and Tumacacori. And we know that many of the Spanish and Native Americans, the very early ones, before Tucson was ever even a presidio, we had members down at Guavavi, at the Guavavi Church. I have found those records. And so these are probably some of the names of our 7th and 8th great grandparents that are buried right here. At the back of this little church, I had a caretaker tell me about 30 years ago that the original graveyard for the original pioneers was back there at the back of that little church, and therefore no one was able to dig or build out there in the back. So these are some of the names of our ancestors: Hilario Santa Cruz, Ignacio Borriquez and Ana Acosta, Francisco Perea, Nicolas Romero, our Perillas. They may be buried either there or somewhere in that area other than Tucson. So when you see Campo Santo here in Tucson, that's about 2/3 of our ancestors. The other third are probably buried around Tubac, Tumacacori, Guavavi somewhere. Okay, Chuck? Okay. There's Adonasha and her rose bushes. Okay. I just want to kind of tell you a little bit about where we came from. Okay. First of all, I think the most obvious, because Sam was very timid, shy, and bashful like I am. Probably the most obvious is our Welsh roots. Okay. And so we do have a lot of our Welsh roots, but on Adonasha's side, we have at least 3 different roots. We have to remember that not only do we have her Spain lines, but her Pima Indian line. And researchers have traced the Pimas and the Papagos back. And there's a little bit of dispute about this in the scientific community, but most of the articles that I have read, because I want to read that kind of thing, is that the Hohokam, many of the Hohokam originally came from Central America, the Mayas. And so we have at least 3 or 4 roots from Atanasha. We have the Spanish roots, and when they came over, and then when they married Hohokam Pima and Hohokam Yaqui and Hohokam Papago, they were marrying people that had been here from the Hohokams. But when the Hohokams came, as you can see in about 300 AD, okay, when the Hohokams came, there was already water here. So there was already people here. So we know that as early as about 2000 BC, we know that people came across from Alaska, came across the Bering Strait and came down. And so many of our very early ancestors had Asiatic characteristics from Asia, and they were living in Hogans. So there's your San Javier Church, and there's some of the native Hogans. So we have a little bit of Spain, and a little bit of Asia, and a little bit of Spanish, and a little bit of Welsh. No wonder you all look so mixed up. We're all a Heinz 57 variety. Okay? We have a whole bunch of different ancestors. All right? Check. Okay, I want to tell you a little bit about Sam and Atanasha. Here is Atanasha. She's pregnant with Maggie and Sam. And these are some of one of the early pictures I have of their children. There's Maggie, Tom, and Sam, Jr., and Lizzie. Except guess what? That's a lie. See, I can't have Teresa because she sounds asleep. I better talk a little bit lighter. I'll come up here. I don't want to wake her up. Okay. This Sam Jr., the first Sam that was born, died as a child. Okay. And so this Sam Jr. is actually Stephen's Sam Hughes, named after Hiram Stevens. And so, but everybody just always called him Sam Jr. I wanted to put Francisco Elias Gonzalez up there because he is our cousin that named Tucson. Francisco Elias Gonzalez, we need to back up. Atanasha and Sam named 2 of their first 3 sons Elias. She was so proud of her Elias roots. And Francisco Elias Gonzalez de Zaya came from Spain and went up to New Mexico where he stayed with his uncle and aunt. And he was in the military, and they sent him over here to bring a group of Indians to join the group of Native Americans that were already here before there was ever any Presidio or anything else. When he got here, Francisco said, "What tribe is this?" And they say, and I'm not saying this right, I'm sure, Tom, but Tom can give us the right pronunciation. We are called the Tucsones. And so Francisco Elias wrote down, I brought my tribe from New Mexico to join this tribe here, and they're called the Tucsones. And that went down to Mexico City, and they changed it into a Spanish name and called it Tucson. And so that's why we are now in Tucson. And so that name came from our cousin, Francisco Elias Gonzalez. Our line comes from the uncle and aunt that he lived with when he was in what is now New Mexico, before he brought the Indian tribe over here to join the tribe. They wanted to get 2 little groups of Indians to kind of keep the Apaches from going too far south to get Guivavi, because Guivavi was a very important church at that time. So that's one of our heroes, Francisco Elias Gonzalez. We did trace him back. Armando, if you're here, raise your hand. Armando Elias traced them back to La Rioja, Spain. So we have our Elias line back to La Rioja, Spain. Okay, Chuck. This is my Aunt Liz and my Aunt Sis. Many of you come from them. And there's Frank Jr. Many of you come from them. And I want to tell you that my aunts used to love to spat once in a while. They used to like to kind of dig a little bit. Those of you the new Aunt Sis and Aunt Liz know that they kind of digged a little bit. And one time they were in our home in Winslow, and they were kind of spatting a little bit. And Aunt Liz said to Aunt Sis, "Well, I got the special name." and Aunt Sis never challenged her. And yet Aunt Sis, her name was Atanasha. And Atanasha is one of the most revered matriarchs in our family. So I thought, why would Aunt Liz not challenge Aunt Sis? Because she was named after Atanasha. But Aunt Liz's name, okay, was Elizabeth Edwards Treat. And I couldn't figure that out. And Sam had told family that we had Celtic roots. So I spent a lot of hours trying to find how we could get our family back to the early Celtic people back in Wales. Just like we said, we've already traced 4 of our Spanish families back to the Basque people in Spain. You're all Basque, by the way, okay? How could I get the Celtic side that Sam used to brag about? So then it finally dawned on me after, probably 20 years of trying to find our Celtic roots in Wales, it finally dawned on me that the reason why Aunt Sis never challenged Aunt Liz was because her name had to have been special. And so I went back to the library back at Salt Lake that has a lot of these Celtic records. And I said, okay, let's look under the Edwards family and see if we can find some Celtic lines. Chuck? See, you can't sleep in my medical students say, Dr. Stratton, we will never sleep in your lecture, okay? Because my lectures are all pretty loud. But if you see all those circles, all those little circles over there in Wales, the little circles in Wales, those are all areas in Wales that were owned by the Edwards' clan. And there's at least twice that many, but there weren't any maps before 500 BC. And so there weren't any maps to find where the Edwards' clans were. But we have had Edwards clans and almost at 1000 BC. And many anthropologists, archaeologists, and genealogists have traced the Edwards' clan way back to the early kings. And I put some of that in on this CD for you, in this little brochure. And so we do have an awful lot of Celtic, and where they met each other, where the Hughes and the Edwardses met each other, see up there at the top, that's Sam Hughes Jr. and Elizabeth Edwards. That's our Celtic line. And where they met and fell in love was right here at this little asterisk place right here. That's called Castile. In Castile, Wales, is where they met and fell in love. And so that is our Welsh roots. And indeed, I've been back. Chuck, again. I've been back to Wales 3 times since. I served 1.5 years of my mission there, back in 64 to 66. And I've been to Castile, Wales several times, Clyde, Wales it's called now. And we do have a wonderful Welsh heritage. It's kind of on a very steep vale. Clyde, Wales, or Castile is kind of at the bottom of a little mountain. And then the mountain goes almost straight up. And one time I was in a little rental car that I'd gotten in London, and it was all snow. These are kind of the highlands of Wales, if you will. And I was slipping and sliding, trying to get down there. And so I stopped a few little farms along the way and met some of our Edwardses and some of our Hughes ancestors. And they had just pale white skin, just pale white skin. And the blood vessels, because it was so cold, was like a bunch of really red little spider lines through there. And when they shook my hand and said, "Hi, how are you, cousin?" The handshake was so warm, and their English faces, and they were just, kind of like they've been eating English-style potatoes their whole lives. Of course, I can't say much, but they just looked English. They just looked Welsh. We have a wonderful Welsh heritage. It goes back probably about 3,000 years from us right now. So that's our Celtic roots back in Wales. Okay, that's the end of that. Now I'm supposed to talk a little bit about Guadalupe and Victoria and Eliza. You all know Guadalupe. If there was ever a saint in our family, this is the saint right here. She was never able to have children. She married Luis Martinez. He was a carbineer in the Tucson Presidio military. In the record that I put on the CD and that I sent you in your little booklet, I said he was only about 4'8". I have since found a record that said that he was 5'5". So when he was an adult, he was 5'5". Okay, and Guadalupe was right at 5 feet tall. And Guadalupe, because she was not able to have children, her and Luis, she became kind of the mother to all of the children who lost their parents in our extended family. And remember, because of the Apaches, all of the families that lived in the Tucson Presidio all kind of just intermarried. And so everybody was kind of interrelated for about 3 or 4 generations. And so Guadalupe, during her lifetime, raised at least 4 families that we know of. 2 Bohorquezes and 1 Perilla, and then she had a Martinez that she brought in. And so Guadalupe was kind of the mother to all the families, to all the children who had lost their parents to disease or illness or cholera or whatever happened to hit them. So this is a very, very special woman to us. Chuck? Okay. This is Petra and Hiram. Just want to tell you that, see the guy down there at the bottom left? He's got it made. Hiram, Adonijah says, everything that Hiram turned, every business that he had turned to gold. And Hiram on, I think it was about the 18 whatever census, I have it written in your book there, he was listed as the 3rd wealthiest man in all of the southern Arizona territory. So he did very well. He went to Congress twice, took his sweetheart with him through San Francisco back to Washington, D.C., and this is the Petra. This is my favorite picture of Petra right here. That's my Petra. Ruthie found this for us. Ruthie Corbett Cross found this for me. And that's the Petra that I've always loved. Okay? And so at the graveyard, we have Petra. And then next to her, when she was older, there was a very tragic event that happened where Hiram lost his life. And Petra then decided to be buried next to 2 of the women that she loved the most in this whole wide world. And she wanted to be buried next to Victoria, who she had raised as a child. And then when Victoria died in childbirth, she wanted to raise that baby, Eliza. And so I don't have a picture of Victoria. I do have her up there on a census, in the 1870 census. There's Guadalupe and Petra with Victoria Bohorquez. That's, remember, we just put a new tombstone in for her. And then I did have, thanks to Pat or somebody in here, somebody sent me, Maggie, I don't know who it was, somebody sent me this newspaper clipping. And this is the only known picture that we have of the baby right there. That's Eliza. Victoria lost her life in childbirth, giving birth to Eliza. And so because Petra over there with Hiram, because Petra had been privileged to raise Victoria with Guadalupe, she was invited to raise Eliza. And there's a lot of information about them in that little book and on your CD, but my time is slipping away. So we're going to be dedicating the grave. What?
You have an hour, right? So you have 25 minutes left.
Okay. Okay, flip the slide and we'll keep going. Okay. One of the things that Petra is most noted for is because after Hiram's demise, she focused completely on family. And these are some of the family at Sam and Adonijah's kids that she focused on. Over here we have Tom and Maggie and Sam Jr. And there's Petra with Maggie and Lizzie. And I went through and got as many pictures as I had. So I've given you as much as I have. And there's Jesse and Emma back in the back. And Annie over on the right. And this Georgia Treat, by the way, those of you that Treats is also your cousin. I wrote their life history. Okay, and so if you don't have that life history, let me know and I'll send you a life history on the Treat family. And then there's Emma and Jesse down there at the bottom. So these were the children, as well as Eliza, that Petra focused on after Hiram's death. This was her second family. This is what gave her comfort and solace and a serene type of solitude. She loved our families, our Bohorquez's and our Hughes' families. So that's Petra with her family right there. It's really Adonijah and Sam's families and some other families, Bohorquez's families, but that was her family after Hiram's demise. Okay, Chuck? Okay, I want to say thank you. That's gone. This morning I went out there, and there's a brand new headstone. And a lot of you paid $20 to $200 to help put that in. And so tomorrow morning we're going to go dedicate that headstone. Is that at 7:30? Teresa, are you awake?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock. 8 o'clock. Okay? So come out for about a half an hour, and we're going to dedicate that new headstone. And I just want to say thank you, everybody, for donating. It's a beautiful headstone. I just saw it. It has a little quail in one corner, because Guadalupe used to go out and capture quail when she was a child to eat. And there's also a cactus, because many of you wanted an icon that was Tucson. And there's nothing more Tucson than a big old saguaro cactus. So on that headstone you will see Guadalupe Santa Cruz with her dates. You'll also see Victoria Bohorquez de Ruiz and her dates. So we've duplicated that, the names at least, on the new headstone. So please join us in the morning. Chuck? Okay, now let's talk a little bit about our Mayans. I was real concerned about trying to tie the Indians from Snowflake and Flagstaff and Tucson back to the Mayans for many, many years. And it wasn't until I became very seriously involved with the Mayans that I began to realize that as I began to see the scientific feeling begin to change. I give you references on your disc to 2 or 3 scientists that present evidence that part of the Hohokam that came up here, that became the Pimas and the Yaquis, that they did have, some of their roots came from Central America or from the Mayans. We know that, for example, some of you live in northern Arizona, and we know that the Hopi and especially the Navajos came from Canada down, from DNA studies and other kinds of studies. And so, on our Mayan ancestry, does she look like she's a Pima Indian? I think she's beautiful. Isn't that our Adonasha? Okay, Chuck? One of the things that has always intrigued me is that in Peru and in Guatemala and even up here, many of the Native Americans talk about a tree of life, and even Pacao down at Palenque, on his sarcophagus, on his grave, he has a great big tree of life. And we have trees of life everywhere. So I wanted to show you a tree of life from Central America that we call Stella 5. It's called Stela 5, but I slur everything, so Stella 5 to me. Go ahead, Chuck, can you play that? It takes just a second. This is not a Pentium 5, it's a 286. It'll kick in here in just a second.
Carved centuries ago in this mountain here in Paracas, Peru, this representation is still called the Tree of Life. One of the most unforgettable stories in the Book of Mormon is the one called the Tree of Life, given by a man named Lehi. In Izapa, Mexico, is one of the most detailed Tree of Life carvings to be found anywhere. One modern archaeologist who has made a thorough study of this stela has recorded 110 similarities between this sculpture and the story found in the Book of Mormon.
Okay, next one, Chuck. This is just a good example. Forget about the Book of Mormon stuff. This is just a good example, since we get to the next slide here, of a tree of life. And so you'll see that you notice that there are some angels guarding the tree of life. You'll see that some people in the family rejected the religion of whatever the Mayan religion was at that time. Over here you see a guy that's a scribe that has a pen in his hand and he's writing. And over here, this is kind of interesting to me. This up here, this guy's name may have been in the Old Testament. There's a place that's called Lehi, and that's where Samson slew over 100 Assyrians with a jawbone. And so here you see a jawbone just up above his head. So his name may have been Lehi. And this, of course, is a queen. This is an Egyptian headdress. So whatever her name was, it probably would have been some kind of an Egyptian name. Okay, Chuck? Okay, we thought, up until the 60s, we thought that the Mayas were all a very quiet, peaceful, gentle people like me. But now, since then, we have realized that the Mayans were actually pretty bloodthirsty people. Okay? So I just wanted to show you that scientific transition from understanding the Mayans as being a quiet, peaceful people to being a warlike people.
Ironically, it was the Lacan Dome who led Healy to a discovery that would send the image of the peaceful Maya up in flames. Bonampak, a ruined Maya palace in the depths of the Chiapas jungle, unveiled a series of startling murals depicting torture, warfare, and bloodshed. At first, scholars refused to believe their eyes.
When Giles Healy stepped into Structure 1 at Bonampak, he didn't see what you and I see. He saw what he was prepared to see. He saw calendar priests. He saw anonymous, timeless, peaceful Maya. And so he could not even see the battle that was raging in front of him. When he looked, and when other scholars looked at scenes of fingernails being ripped out of captives, ends of fingers being trimmed right off, scholars looked and saw, well, gee, had the Maya been dipping their hands in paint somewhere? Why was there all this blood?
Until just a few years ago, scholars believed that Maya skywatching and their calendars were dedicated purely to noble religious observances. Bonampak forced them to change their minds.
I walk into room 2. What I see are captives almost flying out of the picture frame. They're being grabbed by the hair. They're having their heart even ripped right out in one case. Body parts seem to be flying out of the picture. Shields are dropping. Spears are breaking. It's a remarkable image that captures a sense of the spontaneous chaos of warfare.
So whenever I would get mad at my teenagers and say, Craig, you will take the garbage out. When? Now. My wife would say, oh, slow down, Maya. Slow down, Maya. We've got to get some Pima Indian in there. Let's make it a little bit more peaceful. A little bit more peaceful. Okay? Okay, you're writing a calendar. Really neat. They had at least 4 different calendars. The Maya had at least 4 different calendars that we're aware of. And their writing is kind of cool. And so this is a part of our ancestry, since we have some Mayan blood in us somewhere. Okay, Chuck, you want to play that? Oh, wait, while I get started. Understand, I love the Catholic Church. I didn't make this. I love the Catholic Church. They've helped us a lot.
Indecipherable engravings on their monument walls held the key to the mystery of the Maya. He was right, but only now, after one of the greatest code-breaking feats of all time, can the secrets of these silent stones finally be revealed. The sacred world of the classic Maya should never have become a mystery. They left, after all, an abundant written record. An independently invented writing system. Incredibly, one of only 5 produced in the history of the world. These were texts imbued with magical power, descriptions of their cosmos, chronicles of their dreams. Beautiful, fragile documents, they were a truly remarkable achievement. A unique and totally original written language, as momentous as the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt. They bear witness to the birth of the first written language in the New World.
Esta es la letra A.
The importance of these texts was recognized by the first European invaders centuries ago. In 1562, a devout Catholic priest named Diego de Landa convinced one of the last surviving Maya scribes to translate the Spanish alphabet into Maya. Landa fervently wanted to bring Christianity to the Maya. He felt learning their language was his best hope of reaching the people he yearned to convert. Landa dedicated his life to understanding the Maya and to saving their souls. Still, his memory is not revered, rather it is reviled.
Landa was distraught, I think, maybe even destroyed, when he discovered that people that he believed and he'd come to know had been converted to Christianity, and he found them continuing to practice pagan rituals. He lost it. He went absolutely crazy, and he began to try to root out and extirpate any remnants of ancient religion.
In a single night, this man of God burned hundreds of precious books. Books containing science, their literature, a record of their lives. As the Maya looked on, it was as if every copy of their Bible and Constitution had gone up in flames.
We're very fortunate now because most of the Mayan glyphs can now be read, and so that's okay. So we're going to be with Jessie. She was awful lonesome over here all by herself, and so we are now able to read the Mayan glyphs. And so those earlier records being lost perhaps wasn't as catastrophic as some people back in the 40s and 50s thought it might have been. I just wanted to show you how to read some Mayan glyphs. You ready? You want to read Mayan? This is about Lady Keita at Piedras Negras. She was a queen. She was in charge of her tribe or her group. And these are called introductory glyphs over here, the first two. And then you read them down. Of course, this is just the very top part of a whole bunch of glyphs. And so these are the two introductory glyphs. This begins her birthday and goes down. And it talks about turns and so on, the Mayan names that they had for their calendar at that time. And then here we have her. This is Lady Keita. And in this particular case, you can tell it's a female because they put an L on there for lady. No, I don't think so. But it looks like an L glyph. It probably isn't for lady. Okay, they didn't know much English when she was alive at about 600 AD, 500 AD. But then you begin to read down. You read down in columns of two. One column, two. So you read down two columns. Come up here. Read down two columns. Here, read down two columns. It talks all about her and her marriage. It talks about the birth of her baby, her daughter. And then over here, this one right here, this is Kakmal. That is the death god. And so right after this image would come the dates that would give the dates that she passed away. And how do you tell dates? Notice over here we have a date way up here at the introductory glyph. Do you see the 3 bars up there on the far left? 3 bars and then 3 dots. Each bar is worth 5. Each dot is worth 1. So that's worth 18. But it's not the same as our July the 18th. They have their own short calendar and long calendar. But that would have been the number 18. So now archaeologists can read most of the glyphs that we have. So we can learn about this wonderful queen who may have very indirectly, a long, long time ago, been some relation to us. Okay? If you don't believe it, again, I show you. Where'd I get that from? That's a Mayan nose. Look at her nose. Look at her nose. Look at her nose. Watch this. Watch this. Oops, wrong way. This way. Ready? We're twins! Look at that! We're twins! Okay? So indeed, we probably have some Mayan blood in us somewhere. Okay, Jack, we gotta keep moving. Only got about 15 minutes left. I just want to show you the way that the Mayans dressed. Okay? The clip up here shows you how a Mayan king would have dressed. And down here is the normal person would have dressed. show you some of the fun things. In the military, you were able to dress according to rank. So up there in the top left, if you took so many, by the way, the earlier Mayans did not actually try to kill each other. They tried to capture each other. One of the things that used to really tick some of the early Catholic priests off here in Tucson is we would get a whole bunch of Yaquis and Pima Indians building buildings and helping them in the fields. And one day they would just wake up and guess what? The Indians would all be gone. They just moved away. And that's what happened. They got that from their Central American counterparts. What happened is in war you didn't want to actually kill anybody because you wanted to conquer a certain area and you wanted all those families to be a part of your domain, a part of your tribe, and to pay you tribute, to pay you taxes. So you'll see that he's not actually killing, none of these are actually killing their captives. What they're doing is they have them by the hair, okay, and so they're in submission to them. So if you only had a few captives in a few battles, you would dress like the guy in the far left, not too much regalia. And then notice the second one up on top, the middle, and finally a little bit more regalia, the more captives you got, and more captive down on the bottom. Boy, that guy, he got a lot of captives. See him with all his fancy red regalia? And then when you finally were a super soldier, you were allowed to actually choose an animal, and you were able to wear the animal skin and an animal mask when you went into war. And so you can see the guy on the bottom right there. He looks like a lion of some kind. That's what their kings would have looked like, a Mayan king all dressed up with his scepter, ready to make some ruling judgments. And I had to show you this guy. If you look real good, here is his face, and here's his arm, and there's his feet. And you know what? He had so much on, so much regalia, that he actually had to have people help hold up his headdress because it was so heavy. So even though I swore every time I had to buy my son Craig a pair of $125 Nike shoes, at least I never had to buy him one of those. That would have been a little expensive. Okay, Chuck. Okay, kind of what they looked like when they went to war. They sometimes had breastplates and shoulder plates. And up here, they covered themselves with clothing because it was lances and spears and bows and arrows. Weren't quite as able to penetrate. And this guy in the middle is really cool. Look, he has metal. Metal from top to bottom. Well, he never got hurt, but guess what? He didn't do much good either because he couldn't move. So we have all different kinds of regalia. And up there, of course, is a Mayan scimitar, and that has Egyptian roots as a scimitar. Chuck?
5 minutes.
Okay, let's go. This just shows you the main weapon that they use.
12 minutes.
12 minutes, okay. There's the lance. See, my brother and sister know that I'm really long-winded. My medical students, they know.
You only have 5 minutes of tape left on an hour tape, so you have 5 minutes left.
Okay, I got 5 minutes. Okay, so there's the lance. Okay, and I just want to show you this weapon right here. I can't say it. Maybe Tom or somebody else can say the name of this. But this was the weapon that when Cortez came in, Cortez wanted to know what he was up against. And so Cortez asked one of the military commanders of the Mayans, he said, will you show us what this weapon will do? And Cortez had a Spanish horse. And the Spanish horses weren't really big, but they were still horses. And he took that weapon right there. It's called the Tio Corpio or something like that. And he hit that horse, and he hit the neck of the horse 3 times, and before the horse's body hit the ground, the head had been dislodged. So they frequently found soldiers without arms, because when they would go into battle, they didn't want to kill them, they just wanted to capture them. And so they would frequently, we find many burials where some of the men don't have an arm, because they fought with those kind of, was he kind of a hot shot warrior? Look at that robe. He's one of those tigers, and look at his mask. Kind of cool. Okay, that may be your 50th great grandfather right there, Dick. Okay, all right. We won't take time to show that. That's a little clip on my own. Let's just go past that one. Okay, we now are able to dig at these digs, and we're able to find these Mayan artifacts. And I just wanted to show you kind of how they speak from the dust. Like, I remember I'm a bishop. like Isaiah said, they would speak from the dust. Okay, go ahead, Chuck.
Cortez wrote back to Spain, describing large cities of 50,000 inhabitants or more. He mentioned towers of heavy construction. He described aqueducts and water systems of great size and efficiency. Just outside of Mexico City, Teotihuacan exemplifies the high degree of civilization attained by these pre-Aztec ancient peoples. The architecture, the design, the massiveness of these structures even rival the ancient pyramids of Egypt. Mitla in central Mexico exhibits the exquisite workmanship of these ancient artisans who were highly skilled in the art of masonry and in the use of cement.
The movements of stars and planets with an accuracy that astounds modern science. Lighting system and covered their temples with art and glyphs. Sealed on lips of stone. Their story, so visible before our eyes, has been just out of grasp, locked in symbols no one could decipher. Until now. Groundbreaking discoveries are unveiling the mysteries of the Maya and the deadly purpose of their skywatching. As the sun moves into place, marking its journey midway between the longest day and the longest night, the great feathered serpent, known to the Maya as Kukulkan, appears as a slithering shadow down the steps of the temple.
Chuck and his family just came back from there a few months ago. They were just there.
Centuries earlier, it was the powerful Maya who stood in these sacred precincts to pay homage to Kukulkan. By the time the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, only remnants of the Maya's sophisticated society remained. At first, the Europeans thought these remarkable cities